Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey guys, this is episode 88 of The Team House. We're live. I'm Jack Murphy here with co-host Dave Park, and our guest tonight is Dennis Franks. I got that right? Yeah, Dennis Franks is a retired FBI agent. Served 22 years with the FBI, right?
Correct, yes.
So I know some of you thought we were going to have Danny Coulson on actually tonight for part two, and so I no offense at all, Dennis.
No, I took him out. So, yeah.
Dennis had to. I'm sorry. Danny had to jump on a flight for business at the last minute, so we'll have him on another time. We'll do a part two with him. But I really appreciate you jumping in at the last minute to square us away here, Dennis.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad to.
Yeah. So, Dennis, Jack and I are both kind of big comic book nerds, and so one of the things that we always like to ask our guests is, what's your origin story? You know, how did you get your superpowers and become the hero that you are? Was it a radioactive spill, or how did you grow up, and what led you towards the FBI?
Yeah. Well, you've heard people talking about, do commercials, does media have an effect on people? And, my first response is, why do corporations spend billions of dollars if it didn't have an effect? And I can tell you definitely that watching a TV show growing up had a big effect on me, which was about the FBI. So I grew up wanting to be an FBI agent. It just stuck with me. And I was very focused. I was one of those kids who was very focused. I attribute, a couple of things to me being where I am. Is one, I was focused and I had a goal and I achieved it. And the second was, I started martial arts early in life, and it gave me even more focus and self, the dependence and confidence. So I don't think I'd be where I am now without, those things, as well as having the right, family background and, being pretty clean cut. I mean, I grew up some guys where we cut up, we did some things that we probably shouldn't have. And fortunately, when they don't look past, 18 when
Yeah.
looking at your background. But we weren't bad. We just did some things.
Yeah. When did you start martial arts, and was that also influenced by the media? It was Bruce Lee, particularly back home. What was this show where he was the sidekick to this Bruce guy, and then his movies, Billy Jack before that. I'm dating myself. Well, I'm right there with you. I remember Billy Jack, and I think you're the Green Hornet.
Billy Jack, Bruce Lee, then Chuck Norris and so on. But yeah, particularly it was something about the discipline and then the Eastern philosophy that attracted me.
Yeah.
So I think I was 14 when I started, which currently they start at all ages, but that was it was a little unusual at that time to get into it when I did and in advance like I did, and I was pretty much recognized in high school at that time because there weren't a lot of kids doing it then. Right. Now everybody does it.
Right.
It's like every corner, but which is great.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
Anyway.
So you had the Green Hornet, you had
there you go.
Kato, yeah, and David Carradine was probably the Kung Fu.
Yeah, that's right. Kung Fu, the grasshopper,
Yeah,
and it all fit with my mindset in exploring other philosophies, and when I was into it, it was like you really do unite the mind and the body, and I had that at least for a while. I can't say I have it now, but So it was neat. It was really good, good thing to do, and that helped mold me. So
Yeah. So what did you, when you decided you wanted to be in the FBI, what was the path that you envisioned for yourself, and then what did you actually do? Did you plan to go to law school? Did you plan to just go to college?
yeah, it's when that time in pretty much now the paths were either being a lawyer or CPA qualified or which diverse background, which is any kind of degree, at least a bachelor's degree, and 3 years of work experience. Their scientific backgrounds and so forth, but I decided, well, maybe I'll try accounting. I'll go that route, but that wasn't me. And even before, that was my major. That's what I signed up for. But even before I took an accounting class, I said, no, I'm just not that oriented. I'm not business oriented. I'm not. So I switched it to political science, and I love political science because you're studying, about current events, world affairs. It's history. It's everything. But there's not a lot you can do with that, that degree, unless you are going to go on to law school or into politics or something. So I took a gamble and switched to political science and loved it. I mean, I just and I did well. And then I remember my advisor telling me that your chances of getting into the FBI is pretty minuscule, based on statistics. And your chances of getting to law schools, not as great a challenge, but I did. I got the law school, did well, and I was a good student. I loved studying. I loved undergraduate school. Law school I didn't really enjoy. I did well, but it wasn't still it wasn't something I enjoyed doing. And at the time, the hiring was a little challenging because with budgets, they have budgets where they can fund things, and this was back when like I was in college back during the Carter administration. So it's when interest rates were like 14-18%, and the economy wasn't doing well, so the federal budget wasn't doing well. So by the time I got in the early 80s, when I got out of law school, they weren't hiring a lot. So I said, you know what? I went through this ordeal, law school. I'll give it a try. So I worked for a law firm for about 6 months, and I just didn't enjoy it. So then I applied for the district attorney's office, and when I was in college, I interned in the honors program with the DA's office. So the DA knew me, so he hired me, and it was a great experience. I was a prosecutor for 2.5 years. You learn to think on your feet. You go up, sometimes you prepare a case, a trial, literally in 15 minutes to 30 minutes. Talk to your witnesses, get everything together. So you really had to think on your feet. And at times, I'd go up against some of the best lawyers in town. This was in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it was a great experience, but still, what do I do from there? Do I want to do that for a career? Do I want to become a judge? No. Don't want to work. I had some offers to go with law firms, but it's like, no, it's just not me. I want to be and I'll go back a little bit. In college, I had a trigonometry and teacher and everything, and he was a PhD in aerospace engineering. And I remember in class one day, he went around to each of us. He said, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I said, I don't want the house with the white picket fence, the 2.5 kids and everything. Not yet. I want a life of adventure. I want to go out, see the world, do things. And that's what I still wanted, after being, assistant DA. So I applied again and got in, and, the rest is history.
Yeah.
It was great. It was a great experience. It was I got to live my dream. And it was I got to see and do things. Obviously you guys have done that too, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But there's kind of a shelf life there, and at some point it's like it's time to move on. So
right. So What was your impression when you got hired and you show up at the FBI Academy?
Mhm.
Because you weren't former military, so this was like your boot camp in a way.
Right.
The regiment
Right.
and everything.
Yeah, the FBI Academy is not, as opposed to like, I noticed with the DA Academy, they were more regimented. It was more like a boot camp for them.
Okay.
With us, the average age of the new agent is like 29 or 30.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because they want to get people with broad experience, So they treated us like it was more like graduate school or something. But, they still, would kick us in the butt. And so it was nothing at all like boot camp or anything. And I would say they treated you with a certain amount of respect too, because you're not some, 18-year-old kid who's trying to find their way around.
Right.
But they bring out the best in you. They still challenge you because they have you challenge yourself. Because the basics were the classroom, which is a broad range of topics. Then physical fitness, defensive tactics.
Hold on 1 second. We just lost.
Sorry, there you go. We're back.
Okay.
So there are roughly, 3 categories. And while I'll say this, it wasn't extremely challenging, but I challenged myself. So, I did well in classroom academics. I did well in the physical fitness. I think I was like 3rd in the class. It's funny when you're in the government and you have above top secret clearance, you don't talk about yourself. You don't, you're very modest. And my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, I'd come home and she'd say, "What'd you do today?" And I go, I can't talk about it,
Yeah.
But when you get out in the private sector, which I have been for a number of years, I was taught, I had some mentors, they said, you got to talk about yourself. You got to let people know who you are. So, so I'm not as modest as I used to be. So anyway, getting back to the academics, I did well academically. I think I was 3rd in physical fitness. In my shooting, I had developed a hand injury in shooting, but when it came to, so I did well, but it wasn't like the top or anything. I was having to get rehab on my hand and everything. But when it came to the testing at the end of the school, there was a combat course, and there was one person who scored 100 on the combat course. And the instructor said, "You're never going to guess who did this," and it was me. So that gave me even more incentive once I got into the division to apply for the SWAT team early and take the test and get on. And also I went on to firearms instructor.
Hold on. We lost sound again.
Sorry.
Okay. Sorry about that. So we lost you right when you were saying that you applied for the SWAT team early.
Yeah, I was still a brand new agent when I applied for the SWAT team, and I got accepted, passed the test, and at the same time I applied for firearms instructor school and got accepted to that. Went to training and passed that. So I became a firearms instructor at the same time. I made the SWAT team. At the same time, I was doing, working organized crime and drug cartel investigations. So, good thing, one of the great things about FBI is that we got to wear a lot of hats. If you wanted to, right. You could do a lot of things. I became a crisis management coordinator in addition to the other things, case agent, became a supervisor, and I was a legal advisor. I became an undercover program coordinator because I ran and operated a lot of undercover operations working drug cartels.
Now, when you got assigned, did you have a choice of where you went or what types of crimes you would work?
Right. We were given the opportunity to put down 3 choices, but we had this kind of ongoing joke about how we were selected. And I think there's some logic to it, but it seemed like it was like this. We had this joke that you got assigned to wherever this monkey came out in the dart hit on the map.
Right.
And that's pretty much the way it was. But, once you'd find some, like, former cops would get assigned to areas where they would be doing more typical law enforcement, like Indian reservations, in more rural areas, perhaps. So I'm sure there's some logic to it, but I don't know what it was. So I got assigned to Houston, Texas, which is not my, top three. And at first I was like, Houston, this is that, Cowtown or something. But there was a guy in my class, Bob Casey, who was an investigator, cop, and detective in Houston. And he said, "Oh, no, let me tell you, you're going to love it. It's a great place, fourth largest city in the country." And he was right. I mean, it turned out to be a remarkable place to be because during the late 80s and early 90s, the drug traffickers shifted, or the Colombian traffickers, Colombian cartels, shifted from South Florida to bringing things through Mexico and then through Texas, and Houston became one of the epicenters for drug trafficking. So we had just a remarkable, investigations and a lot of undercover operations, Title III wiretaps, long-term, cases, and we worked, a lot against Cali Cartel and then the Gulf Coast Cartel out of Mexico, which we did a very good job of dismantling at the time. They fill in and fill back, but we prosecuted a lot of cartel members, and we had a good time doing it. At that time we'd work hard and play hard at the same time. I don't think anybody can do that anymore, but
yeah,
it was great.
Now, so when you showed up, I imagine that in a place like Houston, the office for the FBI, there's a lot of different crimes. There's a lot of different divisions or departments. Did you ask for drugs? Did you not ask for drugs, but did you?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I know that. Hold on. Sorry.
That's okay, guys. And I appreciate you bearing with us a little bit tonight. We're working with our producer that we just brought on. It's not his fault. We're getting him up to speed and working on different camera shots. Thank you, Dennis.
Okay. No, I just got back in, and my wife and daughter were out, and so I had the dogs in here, but they just got back in, so I sent the dogs back out. But actually, I think what happened was that the supervisor, there was a SWAT at the time, and it was called C1, or they had a lot of criminal squads that did typical, but I think at that time there was only one squad that worked organized crime and drug trafficking. So the supervisor actually picked me once they had the list of people coming. There were 4 people in my class who came in bulk, and so he picked me, and he knew that I was a lawyer and had this, former prosecutor. So he signed me to some of the investigations to do. Do I still have you?
Yeah, we're here. We got you.
Okay. To work on, Title III affidavits and so forth. And one of the first ones I worked on was with a former Army officer who had a case in Galveston. So we had an offsite on it wasn't exactly a beach, but it was a cottage. Mm-hmm. And we had set up monitoring station there. And I got to know, Delmer pretty well then, and he'd gone to a similar path that I think you guys had gone through. Never told anybody but me, I think, that he worked with about his background. And so it was a lot of great people I worked with a lot of talent. And that's the thing about the FBI is their selection process. I think they do a good job of the psychological profile because they're diverse backgrounds. I mean, they're former military. Some are people, some are really hardcore. There are some who are former teachers, stockbrokers, scientists. I know an agent who was a veterinarian, but I think what they do is they find this psychological profile that we have where we really want to do the right thing, and for the most part, we're team players.
Right.
So, working with Dale and other guys with just immense talents, it was just a real pleasure. And what I found is that the agents could be very, very creative, and I think that was another key. I go back and look at like the Abscam investigation that the FBI conducted against Congress back in the early 80s, I think, before my time. But I know agents who worked it, and they didn't have a budget, they didn't have resources, but they made things happen. And there was this saying sometimes instead of asking for permission, you do something, you ask for forgiveness, and that's a lot of what they did.
Right.
And that creativity just made it successful. And I've seen that throughout my career where that creativity will make things happen and get investigations accomplished and phenomenal things done.
Yeah.
And it's not like it used to be, but I think there are still really good, talented agents out there who are working hard and just trying to do the right thing.
How did they prepare you for you had the academy, but I imagine undercover ops, as an attorney and then as a FBI agent, like how do they prepare you to go undercover? Do you take acting classes, or do they just kind of throw you out there to the wind?
No, that's a different thing. But the certified undercover agents would have to go through a school.
Oh, really?
And one of my colleagues that works for me in my company now, and he's been a great friend throughout our careers, and he went on. He was in Houston for a while. He'd been to other divisions and came to Houston and then left again, and then he moved back to the Houston area. And Lenny was one of the best undercover agents the Bureau's ever had, and he became an instructor. So there's an intense school that certified undercover agents have to go through, and it's very challenging. They put them on the spot. They give them obstacles, and it's to go deep undercover. It takes a lot of gumption, for a technical term, and thinking on your feet and creativity again. And I'll just say this about Len too. He when he retired from the FBI, he was hired by the UK to go work there and to work undercover by the intelligence agency there for about 2 years. And it's funny because Len is from South Carolina, and he has this good old boy accent. So it's funny. I'm sure nobody suspected him of being an undercover or law enforcement or intelligence when he was in Britain. But really talented guy. A lot of talented people I worked with. I had, I'll say this: I always had an affinity for military because I'll get to my father in a minute, but there were a lot of former military that I worked with, and then we had military assigned to our task forces, drug task forces. I ran an intelligence squad for a while I was a supervisor on one, and we had a number of military analysts assigned to us because at that time, as part of the drug trafficking effort, the military was giving us personnel, and the coordination was tremendous, and the assets they brought to the table were also tremendous. But what I realized in working with these military personnel who were assigned to us and training with military, and that the military, you had to do more with less. You didn't get always get the best assignments or recognition or resources, and never recognized really. So kudos to all the military out there. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you, and you don't get recognized like you should. Now, I'll back up. My father, my father and mother I was like the third child, and I think that just happened. But they were a little older when I was born. But my father was in World War II. He was actually in the 83rd Infantry, 333rd, I think, Artillery. And he saw 5 campaigns in World War II, including D-Day, Bastogne. He was in Battle of the Bulge,
Wow.
and the Argonnes and some other places. And he grew up during the Great Depression. He grew up on a farm. He quit school in the 6th grade to work and help support the family, which was, they were on a farm, and he had a brother and a sister, 2 sisters, and I don't even think he was the oldest, but he just decided he would quit and work. So he was worked since he was in 6th grade. Now, he only had a 6th grade education, so when he went into the Army and he came out, he started building. He had an uncle who was a carpenter who built houses. So my father worked with him, learned, and my uncle, by the way, never went to school. Or his uncle rather, was my great uncle who I met, but he learned from him how to build houses. And my father had this great mathematical mind. He could sit down with a legal pad and figure out all the material, all the wood, all the material he would need to build a house. And he was almost always exact. He was noted for that. Because sometimes you underestimate and you have to go buy more. Sometimes you overestimate and you're stuck with it. But he was always very precise. And since then, I talked to, my mother knew people that he went to school with, and found out that he was actually, when he was in school, 1 through 6, he was tutoring other students in math. So he had this tremendous mathematical mind without the education. So, but I respect that generation because what they went through and lived through the Great Depression and what he faced in World War II. And obviously he was never talked about it. He passed away in 1993, 94, I think. And toward the end, he would start talking more about his experiences, and I regret that I didn't ask him more, but it's just something they kept in. And anyway, a lot of respect for those who served in the military. I have some really good friends now who served in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and one of my best friends is he's a connoisseur of booze, and so we have a lot of good time. And he showed me mutual respect one time. First time we met, our wives had met, and it was kind of one of these things where you tell your wives not to meet people on social media and stuff, but they did, and they met up, and then they came over one night to a driveway party, and he brought me a bottle of really expensive, scotch. And anyway, he's a great guy, and we've been great friends. And he's helped me, since then, connect with some former military guys and actually current military guys. When I had a contract with the Super Bowl in Houston to provide security, so I brought in not only guys that work with me, but some recently. Guys who recently left the military, and actually a couple of ongoing military that I guess they got permission to do it. But anyway, it was it was a great experience, and great guys. Just we had a good time. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling.
No, it's good. This isn't. We don't have a really formal interview style here. You're sitting there drinking Suntory.
It's anytime a Centauri time in that Bill Murray. And Jack and I are enjoying the Freud, so
Okay.
we're just having a conversation. So, at what point were you? You said you got into SWAT early, and what was that like for you? Because last week we had Danny on, and we heard what SWAT was like in the '70s, and I know that it progressed and actually became a lot more professionalized. So, what was it? What was the volunteer and the training process like for you?
It was, you went through the testing, and then there was the, training that you would go to, but a lot was just in doing it and our constant training. The SWAT team leader when I got on was Gordon Smith, and Gordon played football for the Vikings, and he was this big Hulk guy and just a really a good leader. And then after him, I'm trying to think a lot had to do with your team, the overall team leader, and I became an assistant team leader myself. But we did training, and Houston became an enhanced team, which means we got to train more, we got more equipment. And we would do our regional training, which was San Antonio Division, Dallas Division, El Paso Division. And a lot of it had to do with oil related. We did training on oil rigs. And the coldest I've ever been was out on an oil rig and out in the ocean. And it was brutal. And going back to what you said about Danny, in the early days, we didn't necessarily have all the gear that we needed, and so it was. We didn't have cold weather gear necessarily. It came along. We got better gear and better equipment, like I said. But we had a good time. It was just I loved the training. I loved the camaraderie, and there were times we got to do things that I think were important. I was in Waco, that deal for 5 weeks, and that was a no-win situation. Unfortunately, it was just, and I kind of realized that from the beginning. And I've said this before, talking to other people, but it was the siege, and Koresh had, basically brainwashed his group, and there were negotiations going, and HRT was there, and SWAT teams from the region were there, and basically our responsibility was covering perimeter. And at some point they negotiated with Koresh to let go of a couple of children, and I got picked. I don't even know how now, but I got picked with another agent to drive to a rendezvous point and pick up 2 kids. And one of them, they might have both been girls. It was a boy and girl, but there was one girl I remember vividly. We're driving them to the command post, which was an airport hangar. And I'm looking in the rearview mirror at the girl's eyes, and I'm just thinking, gosh, she's just so innocent. And I just had this overwhelming feeling that this is not going to go well for either side. And it didn't really go well ultimately. It was what it was. Crash set the place on fire. And there were 2, one of our team leaders who came along later on the SWAT team was on HRT at that time. And he was one of 2 HRT members who rushed in to rescue people who came out either burning or came out. They were facing fire from weapons, and they received awards for that. But he was one of the guys that did that and became our Houston SWAT team leader at some point. And we had other leaders, and again we had to we tend to train hard, and in the early days we had a good time too. There were other missions we went on that, like raiding a meth lab, where we had to go to Dallas, and it was a multi-division operation, and there was a lot of rain that week, so we'd have to hang out I forgot where we stayed, but we ended up going, to these bars and, just making the best of it for 5 days. And then finally we had our operation and went inserted every night, went through the woods and, crawled up on the place. And it's just funny how you think about these memories. Like there was one guy on our team that, he was from Connecticut. He'd never been around, cows or bulls or anything. We were going through these pastures and there was this, bull that started making some noise and it's like, didn't know how to deal with that. And then there was another guy who, we got close to him and he was just a comedian. He started making jokes and you're supposed to be quiet. You know how it is at night, how noise travels. And we were trying not to laugh and he was just kept joking. And anyway, a lot of stories. And then one of the guys was advancing in, and he had a snake run across his hand as he was crawling in. And, a lot of good memories. Back in my era, there were a number of guys who had actually served in Vietnam, and they were tremendous. There was one guy. We did an operation on an oil rig where half the teams, we went out on helicopters and landed and did our, operation. And then when we left, we had to go out on Coast Guard cutters because the other half had come in on Coast Guard cutters. And it was rough. The seas were rough, so the Coast Guard cutter couldn't come up close to the oil rig. So the oil rig actually had a rope to be able to drop down, so they brought out dinghies. So we had to jump on the rope and drop down into the dinghies. And of course, you've done this stuff too, more so, but we had all this body armor and weapons and everything. So we had to time it right, jump down into the dinghies. But then we had to go over to where the Coast Guard cutter was. And it's rocking back and forth. So we had to jump up, time it, and jump up and grab the net and pull ourselves up. Now, I'm talking about this because I remember this humorous stuff. That's if I ever do a podcast or a show or anything, I want to do the humorous stuff because that's important. That's what I remember. But the guy that was in front of me jumping up was about 5'6", but Jack was a tunnel rat in Vietnam. So you're talking about nerves of steel,
right?
And nothing fazed him. But Jack jumps up and he barely made the edge and his legs were just going back and forth. So I just started laughing. It's like, and fortunately he made it, but it's just another one of those stories where you, relate. And I think once we got on the cutter, there's the one guy who got seasick going back was a Marine. So we gave him hell, of course. Anyway, just some of the stories. It was just a remarkable experience, an opportunity. I got to live a dream.
Yeah.
So how did you get brought into doing undercover ops? I'd like to talk a little bit about some of those missions or some of those assignments, investigations that you were involved in, going after drug cartels. I think I read in your bio that you also had some experiences with the Russian mafia.
Yeah. So working the long-term cartels, you utilize all kinds of resources, and we had undercover operations what we call Group 2s, Group 1s, and Group 2s, and you had to get all kinds of approvals. We have long-term undercover agents that we would insert into them, and usually those were, because of dealing with Colombian cartels and Mexican cartels, they needed to be native speakers. I mean, I wasn't going to fit in, so they would go undercover, and I became early on a contact agent for them, which means I would meet with them after their work during the day, would go out at night, would get a dinner. Basically, it's to keep them sane and let them keep them connected, to us. And when they would go with meetings, which at the time happened to be, a lot of times for some reason the cartel guys like to go to topless bars. So we'd have to go in and cover them, and actually, believe it or not, they kind of got old, but we would provide security for them while they were in there. And the little bit limited bit of undercover work I did was like as a financial guy, because here I am, this gringo, and I remember in New York, we were up there working, and I was sitting at a dinner table, and this was kind of a surreal experience. There was a Colombian, a Mexican, a Puerto Rican, a Cuban. I think there was somebody from Spain, and then me. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, this is kind of surreal. I'm going to remember this, and I still do. But the undercover, to work in undercover, you kind of have to volunteer. I mean, sometimes you may get picked, and like I said, you have to have the training, you have to have the backstopping, and they just put you out there, and it's risky, and but it's effective. So based on the fact that I was a case agent on a lot of undercover operations, which I probably ran, I don't remember now, 12 or 15 undercover operations as part of an overall investigation. And once I was promoted to a supervisory position, at some point, in addition to the other responsibilities I had, they asked me to be an undercover program coordinator, which I enjoyed doing. I did that for probably 8 years or so. And I was responsible for kind of overseeing and administratively monitoring all the undercover operations and undercover agents for all the programs, whether it was counter-terrorism, national security, criminal violations. So it was just another opportunity to really experience all that the FBI had. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. I would be also interested in hearing like a little overview about the situation with the Mexican and Colombian drug cartels at that time. I take it this was mostly in the 1990s that you were going after these groups.
Yeah.
What was their MO at the time? How did they operate? How were they organized? And if there are some examples of the undercovers that you ran from like cases that have been prosecuted that you're able to talk about, I think it would be fascinating to hear some of those details.
Yeah. So one thing I realized about the cartels, and you've seen this if you've watched, Narcos and Narcos Mexico, which I finally did. I kind of resisted it at first, but then I watched it, and it's extremely well done. But the thing I noted early on about the cartels is that they became ingenious business-wise. They learned to adapt to the business climate and what worked. So what we found was, and this has been shown later, is like the Colombian cartels realized that their loads were getting seized out on the seas and in the Caribbean and Florida and everything. So they're like, I don't want to work with the Mexicans, but they have this history of getting contraband across the border. They've been doing it, whether it's cigarettes, marijuana, you name it. They've been doing this for decades and very successfully. So eventually they started working with them. And again, it's that business model. They may be competitors, they may not get along, but if it's good for business, they adopted it. And they did, so they started working with the Mexican cartels. And at first, they would, there was the payment for, every shipment that Mexican cartels got across. But at some point, they started, dividing the loads, like the Mexican cartel, which we focused on the Gulf cartel, which was, the, eastern, toward the Gulf, Matamoros and down. And they would get 50% of the loads. So you had, like, the Colombians would get their shipments brought across, and then the Mexican cartels would bring their shipments across too. So what we were able to do at some point was infiltrate the cartels and get into the shipment aspect of it and introduce our undercovers. And we would have these, we did a lot of what we would call controlled deliveries, and which undercovers would arrange for the shipments, and sometimes they'd be flown in, sometimes they'd be driven across the border. We would receive them. All right, so working undercover, we would do the next part was take it to the next person in the ladder, which was going to take it to New York or Chicago or somewhere. But along the way, while we were delivering the load would get confiscated and get pulled over, and by by law enforcement, and it just random seizure. Mm-hmm. So then they would get arrested and so forth, the ones receiving it, and then we'd work our way back up the ladder at some point, as far as putting the case together. And we did a lot of controlled deliveries, and we got pretty creative too as far as how we would secrete the loads. We would use, and this was in a case, so I can reveal it, where we took a pallet of plywood, and we actually cut out the center of the pallet of plywood, put, I don't know how much, it was probably 200 kilos of cocaine in it, then put 3 full layers of the plywood back on top, nailed it all together. Put in a rental truck, and of course we had the rental truck so that it would, we could control it, I'll put it that way. And we had, a lot of surveillance and everything, and so anyway, it was all coordinated. And there was one situation where we did that, and the surveillance had a little difficulty keeping up, which is not unusual, so you don't get disclosed. But the load went into a garage somewhere at the house, and we weren't sure. So we're sweating bullets because you don't want to lose, multi-million dollars worth of cocaine. You're going to pay the price, administratively. And one of the surveillance agents, again, this creativity, he started walking around the neighborhood. And fortunately, there was this garage had window panes in it. And we had put, again, this load had gone into the back of a pickup truck, and we covered it with a Christmas tree. So he could see the Christmas tree. And that saved our butt. I mean, saved that time my supervisor's butt, which he was phenomenal. So we kind of rejoiced in the fact that we were able to do that. So there were operations like that, and then, for example, against the Gulf Cartel, there were a series of seizures, not only by the FBI, but DEA done, probably even Texas DPS, and we put together what's called a RICO case, which is racketeering, influence, corruption organizations, against the Gulf Cartel. And we took all these seizures that had been done over years, and I became one of the case agents and became what was considered an expert witness in that. And we put together seizures totaling, I think it was 10 tons of cocaine. And conversely, we also did the money going south. We did seizures there, undercover operations where we did the same thing, just in reverse. And we had, I don't remember how much money we'd seized, but there were times when we literally would take suitcases with $1 million in it. And, that brings up the question, were you ever tempted? No, because it didn't seem real to begin with. And it just never was a consideration, and it never would be worth the consequences of, going to San Quentin or somewhere for, 20 or 30 years just based on, money. But it was phenomenal. And there was one case that it was a national from a country you never would have thought was driving the load. And I won't go into it, but he was arrested. His father was an intelligence agent for this other country, and the attorney representing him went to Mexico. Basically, somebody hired him, paid his fees. He went to Mexico. He pulled me aside one day. He said, hey, here's what happened. I went to Mexico. They blindfolded me. They drove me to somewhere, this office building. I went in there. There were all these phone banks, and there were like 5 different languages I could discern that were being spoken on these phone banks. And so it's an example of this elaborate money laundering operation that I would even speculate to help fund an intelligence agency of another country. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
So anyway, a lot of the cases were put together, and there were mass prosecutions. And like I said, we actually ended up capturing the head of the Gulf Cartel, Juan Garcia Prego, and we had this big blow up of all the members that had posed for a big picture at one time, and I would testify and I'd go like, yeah, he's in U.S. prison, he's in Mexican prison, he's in he escaped. This one was killed by the organization. This was killed by another organization, and I could go throughout, but it's like cut off the head of the dragon, and the head grows back at some point. So
yeah. Dennis, for the FBI operations, some of these undercover cases that you were managing as a contact officer, how long would these guys be undercover for generally?
It varied. It would be, sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year, sometimes longer. It would, and sometimes it was just incremental. They wouldn't have to be, actually inserted into the organization. It could be just meetings, occasional. But it, I had a lot of respect for those guys, and you all know about Joe Pistone, infiltrating the Italian mafia in New York. And I had beers with him one night at the academy because we actually had a room where we could go in at night when we wanted to, and have beer, pizza, and whatever. And I met him in there, and he was one of the original ones who, and he dealt with a lot. He sacrificed a lot, I would say, at least as far as what he had to do, and he didn't get the support he needed, and it changed a lot over the years, improved, but he was on the cutting edge of it. Yeah. How
did you, when you were undercover, or especially some of the guys who maybe were inserted in the organizations, how do they manage, they're undercover as a criminal, how do they manage being law enforcement, but expecting to engage in criminal-like behaviors?
Well, it takes a talent, because one of my former supervisors, Phil, did a lot of undercover operations in New York when he was assigned there. He did organized crime, he did drug trafficking investigations where he was inserted. And Phil was, when you asked that, initially I was going to say you can't be an Eagle Scout necessarily, but Phil was an Eagle Scout. So you just have to take on a persona. You have to, it is in a way, it is like immersing yourself into an acting role where you take on the character. You have to be that character, or you're not going to survive. And there's certain things you do along that line, which I won't really get into, but at the same time, that's why it's important to have the contact agents where they keep you in reality. They're like, hey, remember who you really are, and we're good guys, and so forth. It's not to say that occasionally there have been some who've gone to the other side because they just got so immersed in it.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge.
Well, I imagine the other side can be kind of seductive. There's danger, but there's glamour. I'm sure there's money.
Girls.
Yeah. I haven't seen that personally, but I've heard about it. Happening in Florida. at some point where, guys did go to the other side. And I'll say this too, one of the aspects of working these investigations, you deal with corruption from, particularly with other agencies, local agencies and so forth. And one of the most interesting experiences I remember was going to this supervisor I had, Phil, who had done a lot of undercover work in New York. He and I went to South Texas, which was the very tip for an investigation, and we had to meet with an agent who was actually a supervisor with another agency. Now, I won't name the agency, but we were pretty sure that he was corrupt because we just had information. And the problem with the border at that time was that, particularly if they were related, say, if it was Border Patrol or Customs or whatever, a lot of good personnel that they dealt with stuff I would never want to deal with. Yeah. But if they grew up in that area and they had family, and there was family on the other side, and this is shown out in Narcos and so forth, that they could be co-opted easily. Hey, you've got family members over here, you better work for us, or we're going to take care of them. So it was kind of a no-win situation. But anyway, we went into a meeting with this agent from another agency, and at the same, while we were talking to him about a legitimate investigation he's starting to ask us, like, where are you guys staying? And we were staying on the South Padre Island at the hotel. And we were like, we're staying on the island. And he kept kind of coming back to it. It's like, where are you guys staying? And we kind of dance around and avoid the topic. And it's interesting where obviously he needed to know for a reason. I don't know what would have happened if we found out, and maybe we even had some surveillance on us when we left the office. I don't know whatever happened, to that agent or the other agency. I think he probably, eventually, was uncovered and arrested and everything. But it was an interesting cat and mouse experience. Mm-hmm. And there was an occasion which I was assigned as a member of a 5-member team of FBI agents to investigate a very sensitive national security matter. And we worked it for about a year or so, and we actually were inserted into a South American country without, at least initially, our own embassy knowing about us. And because it dealt with something going on in the embassy. And that was a really fun experience because at some point you realize that you're being picked up on, but you don't know if it's the foreign government. You don't know if it's foreign government working for the cartels. You don't know if it's cartels, or you don't even know if it's your own guys or agency personnel watching you. So it was kind of thrilling experience. I'll just leave it at that.
So that was sort of like an anti-corruption type operation, I take it?
It was, anti-corruption and national security in the sense that there were national security issues with what was being accessed.
Oh, geez. So what was the result of that investigation after a year?
We solved it, and we actually we got tremendous cooperation from the Colombian government. We were able to do things on their premises that had never been done before. They had allowed us to conduct certain aspects of the investigation. So it was remarkable. And that's the thing about there was obviously a lot of corruption in South America and Mexico and everything. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Police aren't paid enough. There's just a history of it. And it doesn't justify it, but yet you kind of understand why. But it was remarkable that when you do get the cooperation and the guys who want to do the right thing, which we did in that case. And one of the hats I've worn before is as an international teacher, international instructor, and I taught at the International Law Enforcement Academy in Bangkok a couple of times, and then Middle East Law Enforcement, or FBI, Middle East Law Enforcement Center in Dubai, or outside of Dubai. And then I taught with, that was with Department of State, but I worked with the Department of Defense in teaching police in Romania about crisis management in the context of weapons of mass destruction. But an interesting thing I experienced in teaching in Bangkok was, and this was organized crime investigations, we had students from pretty high-level police, officers from 13 countries. Now, 3 of the countries were the Republic of China, Vietnam, and Macau, which were communists, still communist countries. Now, it's like a UN setting. They've got earphones on. They've got translators sitting in booths and everything. And what I found was like the officers from the People's Republic of China would feel a need to kind of wave the flag and pound the table to promote, the PRC at times. But when it came to breaks and after class, they would come up and they were just cops. They wanted to do the right thing. They just felt they had to do that, and they probably did, to remain alive and keep a job. But they were cops. They would bring me hats and books and stuff, and they were, at heart, they were cops who still wanted to do the right thing. And it's interesting to see that, throughout, investigations, and getting back to going forward to the Russian investigations. That I was promoted to supervisory position. I supervised the drug task force, multi-agency drug task force. And they brought me back into the main office, and I supervised we made a strictly organized crime squad. And for us, when I was in Houston, was Asian organized crime. We had the second largest Vietnamese population in the country in Houston. And there was a lot of trafficking, human trafficking, and people, actually, Chinese who would pay, $10,000, $20,000 to get transported, and they would get extorted and taken advantage of. They would be shipped to Guatemala and then brought up through, traffickers through Mexico and into, Texas and so forth. But we also focused on Russian organized crime, and that's when I developed a fascination for working Russian organized crime, because the culture is amazing. I mean, they tend to be very intelligent, very strategic. I've often said that they're, dealing with Russians is like dealing with chess players but they're 6 plays ahead, while most people in the U.S. are probably, they may think 2 plays ahead. Mm-hmm. And it's, so I, working the Russian organized crime, we developed sources, and, it was interesting to get to know them, their personalities, their culture, and, they could be, the investigations could be very, very challenging, but interesting at the same time.
I'd love to hear more about the personalities and the culture of the Russian mafia, because I feel like 95% of the stuff we see in the movies and the TV shows is bullshit. I'd love to hear it from somebody who was actually involved.
Well, I'll give you an example. One of the investigations we had involves, it reminds me of 2 things. One, I'll get back to the Russians, but one of the first cases I worked as a brand new agent was an actual Italian organized crime Sicilian. It was part of the Pizza Connection investigations way back. In Galveston, Texas, there was a pizza restaurant that was involved. They were trafficking heroin. And there were two brothers who owned the restaurant. They were involved with New York and trafficking heroin. And we had a Title III wiretap against them and the organization. And it was rather, it was kind of stereotypical as far as their personalities and everything. But as a brand new agent, it doesn't matter what your background is, for former prosecutor or whatever, they don't really trust you at first until they see what you can do. So I never got to go on with surveillance until one day, or it was going to be a Saturday. They said, "Dennis, why don't you help us on this surveillance?" And but back then we didn't have individual cars assigned. I think I was assigned a car, but it was with two other agents and senior, so I never saw it. So if I ever needed a car, I would have to borrow one from another squad. So there was a white collar squad next to us. And I went to them one Friday. I said, "Hey, if you got anything, I need a car. I got a surveillance." I said, "Oh, yeah, there's this Plymouth Fury or whatever it was. Yeah, you can take it. Here are the keys." Well, there's a reason why that car is available, because it was a junker. So I get on this, we're in Galveston, we're sitting on the street, and it's in February. And it's raining, and we've got our communications going. And they say, "Okay, the targets are leaving." And my car stops, and I can't crank it. And one of the other senior agents comes up, and he tries to crank it, and they're moving. He said, "Hey, I got to go." I said, "Yeah, go." So I get out and I walk to a service station 2 blocks away. And again, it's February and it's raining, and I don't have, I get cold and wet. And they bring a wrecker over and we jump the car. So I'm like, okay, I think I can still make it. So they made a detour and went to somebody's house before they get to the airport. Because the objective was to put him on a plane, because he was flying, or both of them, they were flying to New York. And then agents were going to pick them up once they arrived in New York, following them. So the objective was put them on the plane. And it's like, other agents were doing it, but it's like, I want to do it. I want to accomplish this. So I'm like, okay, I can still make it. So I've got the car going. I get by the airport. This is one of the 2 airports in Houston, but this is the one on the south side. And I get in front of the airport, and I get pulled over by the police for an expired registration on the car. So I'm like, oh, fuck. So anyway, I finally get up to the park and get in, rush in, and the guy just gotten on the plane, but I just missed it. Anyway, that's the story. So that reminded me when we were talking about what is it really like. Okay, so the case we had against this Russian, and I say Russians, Eurasian, there were Russians involved, there were Ukrainians involved, and so forth. But the group that came to Houston had kind of, I'm pretty sure they had posed as being Jewish refugees, and that enabled them to get into the U.S. Mm-hmm. I don't think they were Jewish, but it was a way for them to get in. And they operated a car repair place. So it was nothing really sophisticated like you see in the movies where they're wearing the suits. I mean, these were kind of goombas, like I was talking about with the Sicilian guys. And in a way, they were comical, but they were able to pull things off because they were creative, they were smart. And we never found it, but we heard that they had buried a body in San Houston State Park. Where do you ever look for it? It's a huge park. So they were brutal at the same time. And their strings were being pulled by what we call the Russian criminal enterprises. They didn't tend to have the strict structures like the La Cosa Nostra, Italian La Cosa Nostra would have, where they've got the head organization, and they've got the capos and the lieutenants under that, and so forth, and the soldiers. they tend to be more loosely structured, but the higher the status of the organization, they could pull the strings of the local guys. So, and that was a smart thing to do too, is not to be so strictly structured necessarily, that you bring more attention. And that was true with a lot of the cartel members too. The better ones wouldn't bring attention to themselves. They would live in modest homes. They wouldn't drive, the Ferraris and Lamborghinis. And at some point they would decide, you know what, I'm just going to buy a business and get out of it. But the greedy ones were the ones who kept wanting to advance and everything. And I've often said that it reminded me of this. I think it was Aristotle who said something about it's not power, but it's the quest for power that's the intoxicant. Mm-hmm. And you would see that a lot with the cartel members, where no matter how much money they made, it was still that desire for more, and the power of being in charge and amassing wealth and influence. That was the intoxicant.
Right, and then the higher and higher they get up that hierarchy, the more federal attention they get from our government.
Yep,
I mean,
exactly.
That's like the classic story of Pablo Escobar, right? He got so big, started doing things that were way, way above what any cartel leader had done behind blowing up airliners and things. Mm-hmm. Like, now you got a little bit more attention than you bargained for.
Right. Yeah, that's a perfect example where the ego gets prevents them from really accomplishing what they could accomplish.
Right, because smart money is like, I'm going to get out, I'm going to buy some car dealerships, chain of restaurant, and go legit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would say it now, but I know at one point South Florida was probably riddled with all kinds of businesses that didn't necessarily start out as legitimate. Yeah.
Dennis, I know you guys weren't working drugs, you were working organized crime, and that might involve drugs, which would bring in the DEA or maybe the ATF or firearms or whatever. How was your relationship with those agencies, and was there friction very often between?
Well, in 1983 is when the FBI was actually given jurisdiction with drug trafficking too.
Okay.
But we approached it from an organized crime perspective, where DEA may do more overall, tremendous agency, and they would do more street level stuff, as well as organized crime stuff. Now, like I said, when I was first promoted to the supervisory position, I was assigned to the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Task Force, which is a multi-agency organization where I supervised. I had FBI, DEA, Customs, Houston Police, Harris County Sheriff's Department. I'm sure I'm leaving out agencies, and then I had multiple supervisors too. Not only did I have my FBI supervisors, I had to answer to DA supervisors, the administrator, the ASACs, Assistant Special Agents in Charge, and above. So it was a complicated position to be in, because sometimes the agencies had competing objectives, but you had to learn to navigate it all. And what I learned to do was, and I'll say this, the agents, the investigators, the officers on the squads would, for the most part, learn that it's a team effort. We're just all together. We're just trying to get the right thing done, work as a team, and we would do that. And it was when it came to the hierarchy above, the bureaucracies, when there were conflicts. What I also learned was, I kind of equate it to like being a football coach, or whether it's pro football or whatever, that you would recognize your talent. Think of Belichick or something. I mean, he's great for recognizing talent and putting them in the right places. So that's what I learned to do, was agency personnel. It's like, what does this one bring to the table? What does this one bring to the table? The customs guy has all these connections with, getting in and out of the country. The Harris County guy has tremendous street creds. He can go out and talk to people. The DEA agent has tremendous undercover experience, and he and I ended up going to Belgium for an extended period working on a case. So you recognize your talent and putting in the right positions, and then getting back to the coach analogy, you would find that sometimes you're like, well, maybe this player is not the best for the team. I'll trade him. I'll try to get this other player that was better for this position. So you find yourself trading with other supervisors sometimes when you could. It's like the free agency draft and everything. So it was all remarkable, and like I said, for the most part, everybody wanted to do the right thing. Just take out the bad guys. So
yeah, one team, one fight. Dennis, we have some viewer questions that we need to get to. Let me scroll up. Okay. Richard Ballin, thank you very much. Oh, he just donated. Jackson, thank you. How competitive is the hiring process for the FBI today compared to when you applied? Do grad students?
I don't have. Yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry.
Please. No,
I don't have those statistics, but at any given time, I think there are over 100,000 applications from qualified candidates. Qualified being you meet the educational age and experience requirements, which nobody, unless you're has some amazing technical, scientific qualifications, no one gets hired right out of college. You have to be at least 23 years old. And again, they like people with real world experience. So at any time there are over 100,000 or more qualified candidates who meet the criteria, and at any given year, depending on the budgets and the hiring process, the attrition rate, there may be 100 hired, there may be 50 hired, there may be 0 hired, there may be 200 hired. It just depends. So, you do the math, and it's like you've got 1% chance of getting in or greater. It just all depends. But my suggestion is this: don't let that deter you. Don't let the statistics deter you, because I didn't let it deter me. And if it's something you really, really want to do, keep working on it. And there are other options too. I mean, there are analytical positions, intelligence analysts, and non-agents positions that are available also that are just as important, in the FBI and other agencies. And if nothing else, get into one of those positions and then work your way in, because you got your foot in it.
And then Jackson went on and said, do grad students stand a chance today?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's always better to have higher degrees. I know there were analysts working with advanced degrees, master's degrees and PhDs, and even lawyers working as analysts. So it helps absolutely. In the past there was this emphasis on somebody getting a criminal justice degree or something like that, and I'm like, don't do that. It's kind of like you'll learn what you need to learn. There's nothing you can do with a criminal justice degree other than try to get law enforcement, and it's not going to necessarily have to get an FBI. Get a business degree and then get an MBA, get master's in public administration. And now a big thing is you can get degrees in national security and advanced degrees in that, and go that route. That's my advice right now. Yeah.
I think there's kind of a misconception out there sometimes that agencies like the FBI or DEA, but specifically the
Well,
FBI.
like the CIA, that like they don't want you to have a degree in intelligence studies.
Or-
no one gives a shit.
Or
about
that they want you, they're only going to take people who are former special operations in the military.
Right, right.
That's the big thing. When that's not the reality at all.
No, I mean they're percentage-wise, they're probably looking back, they're probably 30% FBI agents I work with were former military. 30%, maybe 20% of lawyers. 30% are accountants, CPA qualified. And then there's a broad diversity otherwise. Language specialists, former teachers, stockbrokers, people who give up good paying jobs because they want to be an agent and do the right thing and be have the adventure. There's no rhyme or reason necessarily, but it is competitive. So just make yourself. My advice is make yourself as competitive as possible, but have a fallback. Which is go into business, do something. I mean, we have former bankers, you name it, business owners. Just demonstrate that you've got what it takes. That's the biggest thing. It doesn't. They're not looking for people with certain backgrounds necessarily. It's just what you bring to the table and how well do you do on the testing. And part of the testing is that there's an interview that's important too, psychological profile and so forth. And with the psychological profile, the advice I was given is just be honest. Don't try to second guess it, and be yourself.
Be honest in the psychological profile, but never tell the truth during the polygraph.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's funny. I've heard they're not even polygraphing anymore because early on they didn't really do it. Sometimes with backgrounds they would do it. Every 5 years you have to have another background done. But I've heard they're not even polygraphing anymore because I don't know if they found it that useful actually.
No.
Yeah,
it's a tool for an interview.
It's a pseudoscience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And last one from Jackson was also, did you ever work with HRT?
I trained with HRT. We would go back for training with them, and there were former HRT members who came to, who transferred to Houston, became on the SWAT team or SWAT team leaders. Jack Foley was, I think, my second SWAT team leader. He was former HRT. He was one of the former original members of HRT. And there were others there. And I'll bring this up too. When I retired from the FBI, I started my own company, Investigative and Security Global Solutions. And about 2 or 3 years into that, I was recruited by another outfit called Risk Control Strategies to open an office in Texas, be their regional director, and the president of RCS was Doug King. Now, Doug King was one of the original members of HRT also, and he was a badass. And the CEO of RCS was Paul Raiolis, who did in New York. He was a Manhattan DA's office, and he did a bunch of stuff. Phenomenal guy too. But what I learned from working with Doug and Jack, there were things they did I never knew until they'd be willing to tell you the story. But Doug got jammed up. He got injured in a helicopter, basically falling out of a helicopter one time and stuff. But every year they're about, and I don't know if they still do this, probably do, but there are about 4 HRT members who get to go to a BUDS training. So actually Doug and Jack, and I didn't know it when Jack was a team leader. He never talked about it, but they went through BUDS training. And as a matter of fact, Jack held the record for the fastest run. And I'll bring in Delta Force also, because Delta Force was instrumental in setting up HRT. It was actually modeled after Delta Force and SAS prior to that. So a lot of Delta Force personnel were instrumental in establishing HRT and getting it going, and the principles and the testing and so forth. So to answer the question, yeah, I worked with HRT members, trained with them. We'd go back to training, and it's a good group of guys. They're really good at what they do. It's like the paramilitary version of special forces, really. And there are a lot of former special forces guys on there. Like Delta doesn't talk a lot, obviously, and I've worked with the Delta guy, of course, the Green Beret, former Green Beret, in the FBI, and Air Force Pararescue. There was a guy on our team that did that, which they did a phenomenal job too. I mean, they're kind of unrecognized about their capabilities. A lot of good stuff out there. And I currently have a relationship that in the private sector and with some things I'm trying to get going. The group of us are trying to get some productions going with that will help assist veterans and businesses and so forth. And I'm working with, I have a couple of volunteers from Green Beret who are willing to help me with that. Currently on duty, and they're going to try to get Army and to commit to it too. It's something we'd really like to get accomplished is getting this program going where we go out. It's a team concept where we go out and help communities, veterans, businesses, veterans, get their acts together to try to get things going, kind of like the Green Beret does, worldwide, where they go into communities, other countries, and assimilate to the community and try to get improve the communities and so forth. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Dennis, would you like to plug it? Would you like to tell us what the website is or the company or anything?
Let me get back to you as far as we've got I did a production. I was the executive producer and host of Amy Investigates, the Plot Against America, which aired a couple of years ago. We did a 1.5-year investigation. It started out as it's a long story, and I'll try to simplify it as much as possible, or make a short story longer. But I was approached back in 2018, I think, by a journalist out of New York who was working with a production company, and they were looking at putting together a show about undercover operations, and they were going to put together teams and they picked me. They found me as somebody with undercover operation experience, and it was going to be this concept where they put together these teams. And it was kind of like a competition. But in the process of talking about myself and everything, so one of the most fascinating things I did in the Bureau was working with Russian authorities. And I said, as a matter of fact, a friend of mine, a colleague of the private sector who was a former cop, told me that there was Russian organized crime in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. I go, what? I used to work Russian organized crime. I haven't heard that. He said, yeah. And the journalist and I started looking into it and researching it, and found that, there's a big population of Russians in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, in Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, in a big resort area. It's huge. They have over 10 million visitors a year in that area. In the early 2000s, there had been a murder of 2 Russians who had an employment agency by another Russian, and he had left, but then I guess he got prosecuted in Russia at some point, and Russian cops came over. So what happened is law enforcement started looking into it. There were Russian clubs in the Smoky Mountains. There was businesses, restaurants, and they found that there was organized crime activity, but it kind of went away or went underground. Now, so the network, which is A&E at the time, was fascinated. They said, "Oh yeah, let's pursue this." So we went to Gatlinburg, and I identified we found a couple of PIs who, private investigators who we thought had some information. We talked to them, and they said, "Well, there's rumors about these prostitution rings, there are these hotels and apartment complexes and this and that, but actually there's this car dealership that just set up like 2 doors from us that is Russian owned. They had 50 cars, now they've got 250 cars." So I said, okay. So that night I went back, did my database research, and I linked this car dealership to a modeling agency and a medical massage business. Mm-hmm. So, put 2 and 2 together. And so this colleague and I, this phenomenal guy, he owns his own private investigative agency too, which I ended up going back to my agency and my company and running that. But, and I'll touch on that later, but he and I went undercover to this car dealership, like we're searching for cars, and the workers were rushing and said, "How do you need to go talk to the owner?" We go in, and he's sitting behind this big wooden desk, and there's a chair sitting, kind of perpendicular to it, and there's another chair. So I sit in this one, and my colleague sits in this other, and we're talking to him about, buying some cars. Like, I'm moving to the area from Texas. My story was that I just got divorced by, my wife took me for, $1 million, and I don't have anything to do with American women anymore. They're, greedy, and my colleague's talking about buying a car for his wife, but he doesn't want to pay sales tax, and so we're in the guy, the owner, he says, "Well, you need to find a Russian woman." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I know a couple of guys have done that, but it takes like a year for them to get bought over and anything. I'm not that patient." So I'm trying to get him to buy, "Hey, I got some girls, The phone rings, and he picks it up, and the woman is talking so loud I can hear her. And it's the manager of the hotel across the street, which we're told has a lot of prostitution. She says, there's this guy's filming you from an SUV from across the street." And he goes, were they American or foreign? Which was an interesting statement. It's like, why is he concerned about it being, somebody foreign? That was really very interesting. Yeah. So we're just like, we don't know it. We don't hear anything. So she says, "Well, they moved to, they went away." So he hangs up. We continue talking like nothing happened. 5 minutes later, the phone rings again. And she says, "They're back. They're just at the corner. They're still doing it." So he stands up, and he turns into the bear now. So he says, "Well, I'm going to send my guys out, and we're going to get their license plates." So they do. A couple of guys start heading toward the car, and they're filming them as they're driving away, coming toward them. So it's very dramatic. So we figure out we're going to turn the tables. We're like, "What the hell is going on here? Are we being filmed? I mean, we're just talking about some illegal stuff." He said, No, I've got security cameras, but they're, you don't have anything to worry about." So we stayed another 20 minutes just talking about, cars and, women and stuff. And finally, we get up and leave. But, so there's that. That was in Knoxville, Tennessee. But we started looking at why is there such a sizable population of Russian and Eurasian in this part of the country, Smoky Mountains. And what we found was there was a lot of documenting, interviews and on television and articles and stuff about a Oak Ridge National Laboratory scientist, nuclear scientist, who was tasked with going to Russia after Chernobyl and after the fall, of the Soviet Empire, to check on the security of nuclear facilities and nuclear weapons, and this nuclear scientist had gone over there, and so we started. And he had this epiphany when he was there, because he's not confronted, he was encountered by like 20 or 40 kids in his apartment complex who spoke perfect English. Who are you? What are you doing here? You know, and he explained it, and they came down and started talking to him. And he said that he had this epiphany. It's like, I don't want to create weapons and bombs that would kill kids and women and, you know, pets anymore. So he decided to create an exchange program. And there's this local Duma guy that he teamed up with. So they created an exchange program to bring kids over to work in Dollywood and, you know, the resorts there, which they welcomed because they didn't have enough American kids who could work in the summers and everything. So this exchange program started in the early 90s and it assimilated into this huge, you know, Russian Eurasian population in the area. But the circumstances surrounding the scientists being there was that he talks about it. He talked about it like, you know, I was warned, you know, be careful, you know, don't stay away from the women and everything. But what happens? But he ends up marrying the translator that was assigned to him on the first trip. He described going to this with this Duma guy that started the exchange program, and he had this overwhelming thirst. So they stopped at this, you know, water kiosk on the road, and they're talking about, you know, hey, I want to make sure they're good kids, and they're this tall, good-looking blonde Russian woman who speaks perfect English behind them says, "Oh, I couldn't help but overhear you. I can provide. I'm a teacher. I can, you know, provide kids, and along with other teachers, we can come, you know, get this going." So, you know, based on my experience and training, and I consulted with a CIA officer, former CIA officer who works with my company now, and another CIA officer who had been, you know, worked in Russia, and they go, yeah, nothing happens in Russia by coincidence when you're, you know, American official or otherwise, and it was all, in our opinion, it was all set up.
Really?
They found out that this American nuclear scientist from Oak Ridge had been working with youth groups, you know, prior to that. So it was a perfect opportunity for them inserting operatives, you know. And what we learned also was that, you know, translators, the Russian translators assigned, they weren't, you know, they weren't FSB, you know, officers or anything, but they had to report. So we set up this operation investigation and enlisted. We ended up enlisting two former FSB, one former FSB officer and an intelligence analyst who had defected, and that's a whole other story. You know about them, to help us with the investigation in the show. And we set up this ultimate interview of the scientist and his wife, and we're able to, you know, the former FSB officer was able to elicit from the former Russian translator that she got a job at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and she didn't even have to get a clearance. She got a job, but she had to report. She admitted she had to report to FSB about what she knew and so forth. So anyway, that was the crux of the show, and you know, we basically uncovered an intelligence, at least the groundwork for the intelligence operation. Didn't catch a spy because, you know, when the network said, you know, we want you to catch a spy, and like, you know, it takes the FBI years to do that with all kinds of resources and manpower. But hey, I'll give it a shot. I'm a good sport. So that's what we.
I think we.
Yeah, I think he froze. All right, we'll see if he comes back here.
Yeah, it'll probably pick up in a second. Sometimes it
and this is a good time to thank you. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, share it far and wide. And if you'd like to see all kinds of exclusive content maybe the seedier side of life, join our Patreon. $1 a month will get you access to our exclusive content.
And there's a link down there also for the merch. If you want to get yourself a little Team House coffee mug.
We just lost him.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. We'll try to get Dennis back. We'll probably dial back in. But in the meantime, thanks for joining us. And if any of you have any questions or anything for Dennis, get him in. Or since we're here for a few minutes trying to get him back, if you have anything you want to ask Dave or I, feel free to shoot him out there. So I'll just say a few things about what's going on kind of in the background here is we got D producing now. He's behind the scenes. You can't see him. We'll get him a camera one day. We'll get him a camera one day. Here's Dennis.
Okay.
Hey, so you cut out right there just as you were talking about how you had uncovered the groundwork for an intelligence operation at this nuclear lab in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Oak Ridge National Laboratory is the top repository in cutting for nuclear weapons and for U.S. government, and it is they're on the cutting edge of developing a lot of technology there. So it's a very sensitive area. Some government agencies had kind of, I think, dropped the ball, and I never blamed the FBI or anything. There's I'll just say it, Department of Energy probably. Well, I'm probably not there. They're probably not real happy with me, but there's some things. There were diplomatic considerations, and like scientists had. There was a protocol in place for interviewing scientists, and the FBI was involved too, and in making sure they weren't compromised, but sometimes they're. In the sense of cooperation and politics, that security would take the back seat when things were overlooked, and there are other incidents that have occurred where I think scientists have been compromised that were kind of swept under the rug. But anyway,
that's an amazing story. We have a few more questions. Mike, thank you very much for the generous donation. Dennis, amazing to hear from you and Colson. I'm also an attorney by training, applying now. Given your SWAT background, do you have any advice as to how to attempt to position myself for NSD, CT, CIRG with no mill experience?
It's just what you bring to the table. I mean, I was. It doesn't. It doesn't matter if you don't have a military or police background for that type of. If you're athletic and you have the desire and you stand as good a chance as anybody else. So just pursue that. Let them know what your intentions are. It doesn't mean you'll get that, because there's this saying in the Bureau, it's the needs of the Bureau. It doesn't matter what you want or expectations. And, that's the thing about the new generations, the X generations, Y generations, and so forth. It's been a little, I think, challenging for them that, they come in with expectations. But the bottom line is, if you're really right for the part, you'll do whatever and bide your time, and at some point you'll get your opportunity. So let it be known what your interests are and work toward that.
Yeah. Thank you, Brother Dank. Can you tell us about the Russian capabilities FBI borrowed for the Waco siege? A telephone-type subliminal device, a psychic hotline.
I don't know anything about that. I will say this: the Russians were very, very cutting edge in psychic research, and it's actually one of the topics we have on our production team for looking at some of the experiments they've done, and the CIA's done it too, as far as psychic abilities and research. But as far as what I have no idea as far as any of that at Waco.
I think you're holding out on us on the FBI mind control device, right. Dennis. I think you are. But you, all jokes aside, you're right that the U.S. Army had a remote viewing program. Mm-hmm. Maybe someday we can get one of those, because they're still out there. The guys who served in that unit.
We're familiar with the guys in that, so yeah, we could pursue that. And actually, I think there's something there. There really is. I even had. Well, I'm going to reveal a secret.
Okay.
In the plot against America, I had a friend who had some abilities that gave me some advice in that investigation. So, I think there's some of that that's real.
So it made you a little bit of a believer. You think there is something
mm-hmm.
to it?
Something that we don't quite understand yet.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that are out there that you can't take for granted. And as an intelligence agency or anything else, if you don't at least look into it and pursue it, then somebody else is going to. So
right.
What the CIA's done in the past, and with the remote viewing, and I think there's something there. I mean, from what I've read, and there are the experts out there who, it's worth looking into. It's an interesting topic.
Yeah, it really is. I've probably read like 5 books written by people who are in that Army program.
Well, the Men Who Stare at Ghosts is kind of the most popular one.
That was written by a journalist who looked into it. This is a huge segue away from what we usually cover on the show, but I think 2-3% of the time that there's a real phenomena taking place. I think I don't think it's total BS. I think there's something happening there in some instances.
Yeah, there's a lot of I'm not at all a conspiracist. I mean, all these conspiracies out there about this and that, and I'm like, hey, the real world, you realize that's just not the case. I mean, but there is a certain percentage, like you say, where there's something there, not conspiratorial, not these big grand conspiracies or anything, but there are the human mind and everything else. Like they say, we only tap into a small percentage of what is really there, and as I get older, that diminishes even more. But so any help I can get was I certainly welcome it. So.
Lando St. Clair, thank you very much. And he asked, how often, if ever, did you work with postal inspectors?
I did. I've actually worked with them more in the private sector with my company now, who went on to work at other agencies. And they're very, I found the ones I've worked with to be very talented and very capable people. So that's, investigators, and very competent, very well qualified. So that's, my hat's off to them.
Well, do you have any that you could send to the post office over here? Because they're... Yeah, now what types of cases might a postal inspector work on?
There's a lot of fraud, credit card theft and things that they work on, but it could get as complex as, a serial killer or a bomber sending things to the mail. They're the experts then when it comes to looking at, tracing things. So, like I said, the ones I've dealt with have been very, very impressive.
Dennis, is it okay if we steal you for like an extra 10-15 minutes to do the bonus segment? Oh, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Dennis, any kind of final thoughts? Anything we failed to cover that you'd like to say before we kind of wrap up tonight's
No,
episode?
it's just, I'll just plug my company's Investigative Security Global Solutions, and I've got, probably about 8, 9, 10 retired FBI agents working under my umbrella. I've got a former CIA officer, and 2 former Air Force OSI agents who also did, force security in Afghanistan and Iraq, and local, police detective, and we're based out of Texas, Houston and Austin. I live in Austin now, and we do a lot of good stuff. I mean, it's kind of like we're working as the bureau again. A lot of sophisticated work, and we're looking at putting together a show, a program about what we do. Some interesting cases, some challenges, based in Texas primarily because there's so much here. Missing diamonds, thefts of trade secrets, oil guys stabbing each other in the back and stealing stuff. It's fascinating.
Dennis, I think there was, I think we were talking at the same time when you said your company name. Do you want to say that one more time?
Yeah, it's Investigative and Security Global Solutions. I try to shorten it to ISGS, but we do all kinds of investigations, A to Z, corporate, family, high net worth, you name it, and we do security work, security consulting, risk assessments, and then some personal protection. It doesn't replace the bureau, the government work, but we have fun. We do a lot of good work, and occasionally we'll get a case where we're just like we did, in the bureau. And I have a network across the country and across the world that conducted investigations and surveillances and at times in 5 different states and 2 foreign countries. And we're, like I said, we're working on a show concept where we feature some of our investigations and some of our talent and show you what it's really like out there, what it's like out on the streets and conducting surveillances and so forth. With a lot of interesting, talented guys.
How long have you had that company for?
Believe it or not, 12 years.
Over those 12 years, have you seen a shift or a change in the types of investigations you do, or has it been pretty much
I always say that it comes down to, there's fraud. There's always fraud. Employee fraud. There's a lot of, people who steal from their companies, trade secrets, and then go create their own companies, similar companies, and take their clients. And there's a lot of that. There's we deal with a lot of wealthy people who are targets of opportunity, who have thefts, or they're infiltrated, and we even had Russian or organized crime actually infiltrate some families, wealthy families. You name it. It's just it's fascinating. We sometimes deal with some cold cases, where unsolved murders, and it's really hard to describe all the things we do because it can vary day to day, but sometimes it's mundane, but a lot of times it's fascinating. Like I said, it doesn't replace the government work. But what I've realized is, I run a company and I want to make a profit. I want to be successful. But what I've realized is that all of us are still wired as public servants. Mm-hmm. We still like helping people. We still like working as a team. We still like solving things to help people out. So that's what we're best at.
Dennis, this has been really cool, man. And again, I just want to thank you for jumping in at the last minute and coming in. And I almost had I had no idea what to expect myself. But this was really cool because you talked about some things that we have never discussed on this program before. We interview a lot of like CIA operations officers. We interview a lot of like former Green Berets and stuff. But you talking about undercover operations, undercover FBI operations, targeting drug cartels, targeting the Russian mob. We've never really gotten into that stuff here before. So this is like kind of all new material for us.
Good. Well, invite me back, and I'll be glad to ramble on more.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
man. No,
We
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
And thank you for everyone who joined us live tonight, watching the show. Really appreciate it, guys. Please make sure that you subscribe to the channel. If you haven't already, give us a little thumbs up. Leave some comments down in the description. Tell us how you think we're doing. And there are also some links down there if you want to join our Patreon and support the show, and also get access to the bonus segments like the one we're going to do with Dennis in just a moment here.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care,
Thanks for
everyone.
what you're doing, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you, Dennis.